Okay, folks, appears as though our guy brother is indicating it's time to get started this morning. I'm here pretty much acting on by myself, getting our roll up there on the wall. We're trying to get used to this non-live audience situation. Uh, Somebody send me something, send me a question on the live chat real quick, just to make sure, so that I can make sure that everything is up and running correctly. So just somebody, one or two of you, send me a little test live chat question, and we'll see if everything is operating okay before we get too far into the morning here. So. I will wait until those things start popping up. Trouble hearing me? Okay. I'll get the mic a little bit closer here, and we'll see what the results of that are. I can talk a little bit louder as well. Sounding a little staticky this morning. I'll just keep talking here for a bit. Let me know if it gets any better, if it's still the same. And I'll just kind of talk my way into the lesson today. Just by way, I guess, to start out here talking a little bit, I have, sounds like there's a fan running in my office here. I don't know if I can get it to shut off or not. Let me see. Sometimes it will shut off, sometimes it doesn't, so hang on. Yeah, this morning it appears it's not shutting off. So we'll have to do the best we can. Now I think we're okay. That's about all I can do with the sound system that I got today. So we'll see. Let me try something else. See if we can get this shut down. It may be in my office. It may not be in my office. Just be the system this morning. Hopefully that's a little bit better. I don't know. Somebody let me know. Check one. Civils. Systems. Still kind of the same. Well, we will endeavor to persevere here. We'll do the best we can this morning. Is that making any difference at all? Are you hearing any change in sound pattern? I'm checking for shorts now in the connection. Difference now. Okay, I'll try and talk a little bit louder then. We'll get through it this morning. It may just be the system. Yeah, I've got a fan in my office that I just can't get it shut off this morning, so for some reason or another. Okay, let's talk about class a little bit. And we'll do the best we can with the sound. Okay, I have managed to figure out a way to substitute for what we were going to do was our mock congressional hearing. I have found a way to substitute for that. And so I just want to give you a little heads up on it, of what it is probably going to be. And that is, I'm not all the way through it yet, but it appears as though I have engineered the ability for you individuals to interview members of the Wild Horse and Burro, the National Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board. And so what you will need to do, just sort of in a nutshell, I'll have more specific arrangements and information for you about the specific assignment, probably next week, probably toward the middle of next week. We're going to try and get everything settled down a little bit with the communication between myself and the board. And so what it'll probably be is a little written interview article, and I will provide a format for that. I'll provide a format for how long. You know, I've got 50 some odd students, and we can't monopolize everybody's time, all the members of the board's time, so they can't have 15 or 20 people call for 20 minutes. And so they do have some time. They've agreed to do it, but I will organize who's going to call who. We'll probably do that by lottery with regards to who you get. But what it'll be is it'll be a telephone interview, and you will report to me what you will design the questions. You will come up with the questions to ask the board members, and then you will give me a report, sort of a journalistic kind of report back to me. I really haven't got the structure down yet. It's got to be something that I can get through grading pretty quick. Usually I have students graded. I don't know how we can quite do that given the situation that we have right now. But that'll just give you an idea of what to expect in lieu of the mock congressional hearing that we normally conduct in class. So sort of put that on the back burner right now. There'll be more forthcoming on that next week as I get it nailed down a little bit better. Are you having any issues accessing the Evelyn Glenny YouTube video? I want to know that. If you're having trouble accessing it, then tell me on the live chat. If you're not having problems, don't tell me if you're not having any problems. So keep in mind that assignment is due on Friday of this week at 9 a.m. I'm not going to take it if it comes to me after 9 o'clock. So be sure as to be just like handing it in, in a normal classroom setting. So get it to me by 9 o'clock on Friday. And once again, let me know if you're having any kind of access issues with it. It shouldn't be, but we never know. Some of the overload that some of the systems are getting these days is pretty overwhelming. I saw some of the streaming entities just yesterday said that they were going to have to go to lower resolution because the demand was so high that their bandwidth just couldn't carry all the demand. So there could be some of those issues potentially, but let me know if you're having trouble. If you want to turn it in before then, go ahead. I've already had half a dozen or so sent to me via email, so that's what you need to do. Get it in probably PDF format. I can take Word format as well, but PDF format is probably so get that to me. Okay, that's the housekeeping stuff. What I want to do for right now, the rest of the time that we visit this morning, is talk about the handout that I sent yesterday or day before, I can't remember what it was, on herd health management. And I want to visit with you a little bit about herd health management. Herd health management, anytime we use the word herd, anytime I use the word herd, I'm talking about companion animals as well. So you can think of a cattle herd or a sheep operation. You can think of a companion animal living in a third floor apartment just north of the river in Reno. You can think of it in the same way. And so I want to talk about herd health management and keep in mind that health management is one of these situations that it's actually, an art and a science. You have to have a good foundation of the underpinning science when it comes to animal health, but you also have to try and figure out how to apply that knowledge and science to individual situations. And believe me, every situation is different. Many of you work in veterinarian clinics around the area or have. It's just like individual ranches. Every operation is different. Every environment that an animal or a group of animals lives in is different from the one next door. And so there's an art to applying science of veterinary medicine and management to anything, whether it's a herd or whether it's an individual. And so you have to be cognizant of that fact. Every operation, every situation is different. And so I want to go through some of these points that you've got on your handout and expand on them a little bit and try and make some sense of it so that it makes sense sort of comes across in a real sense to you instead of just something written down on a piece of paper. So we've got three big numbers here, three things that we want to cover, and then we're going to some general things, and then we're going to talk about some specific things that sort of play into these general principles. So the first one, big things come first. Big things come first. If you've got a producer, a sheep operation, or a cow-calf operation, as an example, or as a couple of examples, and they've got a track record of consistently having a calf crop or a lamb crop that's 40 or 50 or 60%, they probably don't have a health problem. And nothing you can do as a veterinarian is going to do anything for those guys in terms of the actual health of the animals. You have a situation like that, usually it's some kind of management problem. It doesn't really have anything to do with the individual health or the health of the individual animals in the herd. It's the way that they're being managed. It could be some kind of genetic issue. It could be some kind of reproductive fitness issue. It could be any number. That nutrition quite often is the culprit in those kinds of situations. So it's hard until you get those situations thought through, fixed. Then the health management of the herd and actual individual health management of the individuals in the herd can't really do much for the producer until these big things are out of the way and taken care of. Just increasing the number of offsprings that they may have in a band of sheep or a group of bands of sheep or a cow-calf herd, it's going to do more for that producer than anything you can do as far driving something crunching. So I see here now that the fan is it coming and going? Is it getting worse, going up and down? This must be a system issue that we've got. I think it's probably more than the fan. Can you still hear me? Okay, I'll try and speak up a little bit louder. We'll get through this thing. Okay. So if it turns out, if it really turns out that there is a situation where they've got some kind of health issue out there that is restricting weaned offspring or the production of just offspring, then you got to dig a little bit deeper. If it's not nutrition, if it's not reproductive fitness, if there's not a genetic issue going on, then you got to dig a little bit deeper. And so you got to determine, sort of, when does the threshold of trouble occur? Are you having abortions? When are the abortions occurring? Are the animals just not being bred? What is the threshold? What is the threshold? When is the trouble occurring? And that way you can sort of determine, okay, what do I have? Do I have a foothills abortion issue that's going on? Do I have a tick issue in this area that's causing foothills abortion? Do I have a ponderosa pine needle abortion issue? Got to dig a little bit deeper if all of these other things sort of don't make any sense. And so what that means is that if you're having those kinds of issues, you got to have good record keeping. And if you're working with a producer, a sheep operator or a cow-calf operator, or you're working with a dog breeder situation, record keeping has got to be something that just absolutely has to take place. And it's got to be good record keeping. Really, really impeccable record keeping for you to be able to look at a set of records and maybe help try and determine what's going on out there. So record keeping is absolutely necessary when it comes to both the veterinarian, both the animal health professional, and the owner of the animals, whether it be a companion animal, a group of companion animals, or a sheep operation, or a cow-calf operation, or a steer operation, or even horses, for that matter. So the big things come first. What is the big thing? And you start crossing things off your list. It's like always solving a mystery, which is kind of what makes this profession. Looks like the audio got better for some of you. It makes this profession a lot of fun because it's just always you're trying to solve mysteries, and that's pretty cool. For companion animals, the health, there may be a short in my mic here too, so I don't know if I got it more than 1/8 of an inch closer or not, but nevertheless, sounds like it's getting better. When it comes to companion animals, it may not be really some kind of some kind of a specific health issue that the animal has. It may be that the owner's got rat poison out and the dog's finding it. It may be maybe separation anxiety. The dog is just not, in the case of dogs anyway, the dog is just worrying itself into some kind of a health situation that becomes a nutritional issue, that becomes a deeper health issue. Another mystery I had, and it's still an unsolved mystery, a few years ago, I and a couple of other folks were called down to southern Nevada and on some sheep. They were having some pretty large sheep die-offs, and could not figure out what in the world was going on. And the only symptoms were the sheep's eyes were rolling around in their head like this, and they would die. And so, how do you get these large? I mean, like big die-offs, 100, 200 head of ewes? What's going on in a situation like that? Well, what's the first thing that you start looking at? They're out on the range. What could it be? Well, the first thing you think about is, well, it's some kind of poisonous plant. It's not necessarily the health of the individuals. It's some kind of poisonous plant. So you start investigating, looking for poisonous plants. Well, there's no poisonous plants. They're down there in the wintertime. They're on winter range. There's really nothing, growing that's green that would be poisonous, that you would think that sheep would eat. And the largest component of their diet, turns out it appears to be Nevada ephedra, which is a great winter feed for lots of animals in Nevada, cattle and sheep and all kinds of wildlife. And so anyway, I got this idea. There's nothing else to eat in the area, and so they're really hitting the ephedra pretty hard. Well, ephedra has ephedrine in it, and ephedrine is what's in Sudafed, and Sudafed is what meth dealers use to make meth. And your eyes rolling around in your head is a central nervous system symptom. So we started thinking, well, maybe it's the ephedra. They're just getting too much ephedra. It's not an acute poisoning, but maybe it's a chronic poisoning. And so we collected a lot of ephedra. We sent it over to California to the clinic over there at Davis and said, tell us how much ephedrine is actually in this ephedra. And they sent me a report back saying there's so little ephedrine in it we can't even measure it. So what's going on? We still don't know. I still think it has something to do with ephedra and the timing of the animals being on the ephedra, combined with the situation where there's not anything else for them to eat. What can it be? It's got to have something to do with the ephedra that we're just not, we haven't uncovered yet. So once again, the big thing's big. So this is one of those seasonal things that we don't know what it is, what's causing these large-scale die-offs in the sheep, but we can make a recommendation that you got to feed them something besides ephedra. You got to pull some hay out there, and the hay that the money that you would spend on purchasing hay to buffer the effects of the ephedra is going to be more than made up for from the lack of death loss that that's going to occur. And so since that time, that's been about 4 years now, we've not had any of these big death losses down there. So undoubtedly it had something to do with the ephedra, but we still don't know. But that's a big thing. Big things come first. So buffering the effects of the ephedra that they're eating with with some good, decent quality hay has caused things to get better. So big things come first. Let's go to the second one here, the iceberg principle. And this is one that's kind of should be close to home right now. Excuse me. There's a lot of things going on out here with the coronavirus, but we can kind of look at a herd of humans, like a herd of critters out here. Within a herd of critters, in most cases, whatever disease is out there is probably subclinical rather than clinical. You're going to have a few animals that are going to exhibit signs of diseases, but more than likely there's going to be carriers and animals that actually have the disease or have had the disease, or whatever the disease may be, that really don't show any signs or any noticeable signs. And keep in mind with cattle, for instance, and sheep, you don't have the ability every day to really closely examine an animal out in a rangeland setting. And so they may have something, they may exhibit signs of the disease, and they may go unnoticed as well. And so most of the diseases in herd animals are subclinical rather than clinical. And if you got a few animals that really exhibit the signs of some kind of specific pathogen or lesion, there's probably a whole lot more animals out there that actually have the disease that don't show any clinical signs. And so what that means is that if you're going to treat it, you got to treat all the animals. You can't just treat the animals that are exhibiting the symptoms. And so that goes unnoticed a lot of times, particularly with producers who are trying to save a little bit of money, or who don't have the ability, or at least think they don't have the ability to manage the entire herd with prophylaxis or with some kind of injection. This is something that you have to make sure that as the physician or as the animal health care professional, you have to make sure that they understand that there's probably not just 2 or 3 animals out there. You've probably got the entire herd, excuse me, that's infected. Infectious agents are often in a herd long before there's any signs of the disease. And so a lot of times you just think, well, man, maybe it was just one of those things, you know. You just don't know. And oftentimes what you once thought was just one of those odd things turns out to be that the whole herd is infected with some kind of pathogen that has caused some serious problems because you didn't get to it in time. We've got all kinds of situations like that going on right now in the United States. I know that China at one point in time with the coronavirus had indicated that their patient 0 was that they identified somewhere around the first week of January. And then, I don't know, a week or so ago, they updated that and said, no, they've moved their patient 0 back to the first week of December. And so who knows, before this is all over with, that patient 0 may have been in October. We just, we don't know at this point in time. But people in the United States may have had coronavirus for, they may have had it, and it may have been in the United States for months, and we don't know. We don't know when it got here. I know there was some serious stuff going around in January. I even had something in January that I never get sick. I mean, I just never get sick, and I had something that was pretty bad. Same symptoms, maybe that's what it was, maybe it wasn't. We don't know. But it may be that this particular pathogen has been transferred throughout the country much more than we're aware of, even at this point in time. A classic example of that is Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary lived in the latter half of the 19th century, the first half of the 20th century, and she infected, I don't know the exact number, probably 50 or more people with typhoid fever. She never had any signs of it, but she was a carrier. She spent, I think, the last 15 years of her life or so quarantined in the state of New York, by the state of New York. And whenever she passed away, they did an autopsy and they found live typhoid in her gallbladder, and they always suspected that. And so she had no signs of typhoid fever, and she worked in the food industry, and she worked usually, I think, in well-to-do houses as a cook. And so she caused a number of deaths. I don't know how many, but anyway, she's a very famous, classic case in the medical industry of a carrier pathogen that never showed any signs of the particular disease herself. So we'll know a whole lot more 2 years from now about the coronavirus than we do now. But it's certainly possible, and don't go out and tell everybody that I said that it's been here for months. But it's certainly possible that it could have been here for a much longer period of time in the United States than we have the information and the data to confirm at this point in time. So some of you may have been sick back in January as well, and that may have been the flu. It's hard to say, but it's possible. So the iceberg principle bears itself out quite frequently when we're talking about herd health management and health management, not necessarily within herds, but within groups of animals. For instance, you get a warm day in January or December, after a pretty good cold snap, or after snow's been on the ground and it melts off, and you get a warm day. What does Rancho San Rafael Park look like? Every dog, within a 5-mile radius is out there. And of course, dogs being dogs, they like to sniff each other's zip code to see where they're from, and they can move pathogens from each other in those kinds of settings. When dogs typically don't practice social distancing. They like to sniff out each other's zip code to see where each other is from. So things like that can get passed around in groups of animals, not necessarily herd animals, but in groups of animals as well. And so as an animal healthcare practitioner or professional, you have to be aware of that. Where's the dog been? Has it been to Rancho San Rafael Park or any other park around Reno when some of these communicable diseases are moving around between dogs in that case? So when you get these chronic carriers of disease, they can hide within the herd for years, kind of like typhoid Mary, and they won't show any clinical signs. And so even if you practice good quarantine measures, if you're operating with some kind of a commercial herd operator, for instance, a commercial cattle herd operator, and they're buying animals at the sale barn on a regular basis, and they're bringing them back to their operation and putting them in with the animals that they already have. It's always a good idea to quarantine those animals, for a month or so. Put them in what we call a dry lot and feed them for a while, so you don't let them get over whatever they've got before you turn them out with the animals that your healthy animals that are healthy. But sometimes, even if you have these chronic carriers of disease within a herd, even practicing good quarantine measures is not going to do you any good. Those kinds of measures can't even protect you from some of these chronic carriers of disease that do float around throughout the country, and so you have to be aware of that. And so, if you're going to ask a producer, if a producer is, if you're working with an individual producer, cattle producer, you really need to know as a healthcare professional, are they bringing in commercial stock, or are they breeding their own replacement animals? If you breed your own replacement animals, you're less likely to bring in chronic disease carriers from outside, or just sick individuals from outside. You don't have to worry about quarantining and so on. So you have to be cognizant of those things when you're talking about or talking to and working on a herd health management plan with commercial cattle producers. So knowledge of the source of newly purchased animals often provides a good degree of defense against disease pathogens. Where did the animals come from? Where'd you buy them from? Did you buy them in Texas? Did you buy them in Oklahoma? Did you buy them in Montana? Where did they come from? And so all of these things have to go into your art, side of the herd health management program. Number 3 listed here. Whenever possible, work with nature instead of against it. And the greatest example of that is when you have pastures, for instance, that have been vacant for a long time. They're certainly going to have lower populations of parasites than pastures that are being used, for instance, as winter feeding grounds. And so, you have to understand that. And so rotational movement, rotational grazing, or at least rotational movement on your feeding grounds or off your feeding grounds is something that you have to be cognizant of if you're going to control your parasite loads in some of these pastures. It doesn't make sense, and you will hear this. You will hear producers say, and sometimes you'll even run across this with companion animals like horses and sheep. We're getting more and more companion animals on ranchettes these days than ever before. And so you even hear some of this with respect to some of these ranchette companion animal situations. But you've got a producer that says, we've got to move into, we're going to move into our winter feeding ground, and we know that there's a lot of parasites in that particular feed ground. So we better hit them with some parasite medicine before we move them in, or once we get them in there. Well, maybe you want to find another pasture. Maybe you want to suggest that you find another pasture that you can make a winter feed ground that hasn't had animals in it every year for the last 10 years, and move them into that one, and then apply your parasitic medicines instead of the other way around. And maybe you want to consider suggesting to in a herd health management plan to a producer that they have two winter feed ground pastures, and they alternate them from one year to the next. And so by doing that, you're going to improve the efficacy of any kind of parasitic medicine that you apply to the herd. So it just makes sense. And these are the kinds of questions, and once again, that you have to be familiar with and ask of your clientele. You're always having to ask your clientele questions. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a 10,000 mama cow calf operation in northern Nevada, or grandma so-and-so's chihuahua that's the love of her life. You continually have to ask questions with respect to health management of these animals. Keep in mind too, this is always a good, you have to keep an understanding that even vaccinations, sometimes under the best of circumstances, under field conditions, just don't work as well as they work in clinical trials. So you have to be cognizant of that, because sometimes they just don't work as well under field conditions. Typically, lots of times they're not tested under really harsh field conditions. For instance, wild horses and burros. Most of the IUD types of contraception just do not work under field conditions out on the range. They may work in a paddock in Kentucky, but they just don't work under field conditions in rangelands. So those are the three major things that you need to be aware of. Big things come first, the iceberg principle, and work with nature instead of against it. Those are three things that you have to keep in mind in any kind of a herd health management program that you're going to design for any of your clients, whether they be large agricultural producers or individual companion animal owners. Now, the second page of your handout here has a lot of sort of scattered things in it that are important. And this is not a final list, or a comprehensive list, I should say. This is not a comprehensive list of all the things that you need to consider, but I've just got some major ones here that have to play into herd health management of any kind once at any time. So, first thing, keep in mind, herd health management is not a vaccine program. That's not a herd health management program. A vaccine program is part, in most instances, part of a herd health management program, or part of an overall health management program. But it's not a health management program in itself. And each health management program that you design for a client, whether it be in a herd or whether it be in an individual companion animal owner, is different than the person next door. Every situation is different than the situation before it or the situation after it. All the conditions cannot be the same. And you might get some that are similar sometimes, but you have to approach it from the fact that they're all different. And so you've got to combine the knowledge of your biology, your disease biology, your production system of a specific operation. And once again, every operation is different. And you have to know something about your client, the capabilities of your client. And we'll kind of talk about that. So you've got to know something about the physical logistics that the physical conditions that the animals live in. You have to know how they're treated, how they're moved around. For instance, we can talk about how are animals transported. If it's herd animals, how are they transported? How often are they transported? What time of the year are they transported? What kind of conditions are they transported in? You go to the Snafflebit Futura, and you see, trailers, horse trailers out there that are worth more than some of the houses I've owned. And so they're transported quite differently than, for instance, a group of pigs might be. 4-H pigs or FFA pigs that might be going to slaughter at a local slaughter plant. So, how animals are transported, when they're transported, all of those things come to play when you're trying to develop a health management program. It has to take into consideration, a health management program must take into consideration the economic parameters of the owner of the animals. Does the owner have the economic wherewithal to do everything that you, as a healthcare professional, would like to see the animal, be subjected to and provided with? In most cases, they're not going to be able to do everything that you would like for them to do. In some cases, it's going to be a health management plan that is going to be mostly a vaccination plan that has an economic component to it. For instance, if you're in a veterinary practice for small animals, and you have a number of clients nearby that are elderly, and they live alone. They may be on their own, not living in assisted living, but on their own, living in apartments, living in small homes. They have a limited amount of income, monthly income. They may be on Social Security or Social Security disability. You might want to time the rabies shot, the annual rabies shot for their animals with the time of the year that they receive their income tax refund, or at the end of the month, or the middle of the month, depending on when their SSI check or their Social Security check comes in the mail or so to speak. I don't know if they mail them anymore or not. They may do direct deposit, but you get the idea, right? So you may have to time what you recommend with their economic issue, with their economic ability, and sometimes that's overlooked. Um, Different animals, whether they be companion animals or herd animals, they have different risk factors. They have different risk factors. Nutrition compromised animals present different risk factors than non-nutrition compromised animals. If you have animals, we mentioned a while ago, animals running around, dogs running around in Rancho San Rafael, they could transfer disease from one to another. If you've got a common allotment that you're running on with three or four other producers, and the three or four other producers, if one of those producers doesn't test his bulls for trick, you may end up with trick, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to be cognizant of that as a healthcare professional for animals. What kind of situation? What are the logistics? What kind of an environment are the animals that you're working with living in? And then the last one that I'll mention today. I'll mention two. Sometimes you got good producers that can diagnose things and hit things off the pass, and sometimes you get producers that really seem to not have a clue. You've got some pet owners that are really sort of sharp about it, and you've got others that you just can't depend on them. You can't depend on them to feed their animal every day. So it doesn't make sense to prescribe something when you know that there's just really no chance that the animal owner is going to follow through with your recommendations. And then the last thing I want to mention is this whole thing about pathogens are constantly arising. They're always changing. The laws are always changing. The big law change that we've had in the last 2 years, 3 years, is the FDA control over antibiotics has changed. Used to, you could go to the feed store and you could buy 10 bottles of Combiotic or Terramycin. Can't do that anymore. You got to have a prescription for it. In order to get a prescription, you have to have a quote unquote working relationship with a veterinarian. And there's some guidelines that establish what that working relationship is. But the idea is things are constantly changing out there, and so you as a healthcare professional have to stay up on top of that because that's your job. And not necessarily the producer or the animal owners. They're trusting you to be the professional in that situation. So as a practicing healthcare professional, you got to be able to synthesize all of these contextual variables and work them in sort of in an artistic way, work them into a successful, cost-effective, useful, reliable health management. And so once again, this is not an exhaustive list of things that you have to consider, but hopefully it gives you an appreciation for the things that you have to consider when you're designing a health management plan for herd animals or for companion animals or a group of companion animals. We see more and more groups of companion animals now. You can't just have one dog, you got to have 4 or 5. And the same way goes with cats as well, and even with horses. One horse means you got to have 2 horses. And so we see this more and more. And so, anyway, I hope you have an appreciation now for herd health management design and what goes into it. If you got any questions, now's the time to shoot them to me. I'll try and answer them. And we'll get you out of here, cut you loose, in case you want to go to your 9 o'clock class here in a bit. So, questions? I'm watching. Hopefully all of you are weathering the self-quarantining. Social separation stuff. Okay. Not seeing any questions. see what the time lag is here. Okay, if you're all good, I'll talk to you again on Friday. So have a good rest of the week. Stay safe. Bye-bye.